young South Africans are exploring African spirituality in a podcast looking into a variety of issues affecting Africans. Umoya shares various modes and influences of their practice in daily life, and the duo explores how modern Africans think about their sense of being and belonging. They seek to answer questions within the realm also of indigenous knowledge systems. For more information, we're joined in the studio by the duo, Milisuthando, Bongela and Athambile, Masola. Ladies, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. When I found out I was about to interview you, you're first faced with, I've got so many questions to ask you, because it's a subject matter that I, in my experience as a South African, would not have grown up with naturally. But I've got friends who have, and I know that more and more it's important to them as you reach certain age. And the first thing that struck me when I pulled up a story about you is that the two of you are young, vibrant South African women, which historically I don't think is the face that you would normally put on African spirituality. How important was that in your decision then? Let's start with you, Athambile, about deciding to bring this podcast to air and speak about African spirituality from your perspective as a young South African.
So for me, it came out of conversations with friends. So as you say, it might appear that, you know, the face of African spirituality is an older woman or an older man, but I think given the conversations I've been having with friends, a lot of young people are having questions. And I think at that stage, it's still about questions, and some people are leaning towards practices. A lot of people I follow on Instagram, incidentally, are also kind of having that conversation. So you'll see that in people's Twitter feeds and Instagram timelines, I forget the word for it, but people are showing what their journeys are. So either they've gone home to do umsebenzi, or they are going through uktwasa. People are now talking about it more and more. So for me, it was a response to that rather than the face of African spirituality looks a particular way. I think there's always been young people who have access to it, and now we're just bringing it into a public domain in a different way.
Milisuthando, obviously this is very important to you in your life, for you to be a part of this. Tell us a bit about your own personal experience in realizing and coming to a place where you realize that this is not just an important thing within my personal experience or in my family, but it's part of my day-to-day.
Yes, absolutely. So for me, it's about demystifying African spirituality for myself. And because I was in conversation with Athambile and our group of friends, we thought we're not the only ones who are searching for these questions. I was fortunate enough to grow up in a home where we practice Christianity and African spirituality. So isintu, imisebenzi, and amasiko are not new things to me. And so, but it's somewhere along the way, I kind of forgot about them, and I was reading life only through a political lens, so only understanding life from the perspective of the politics. And I thought, you know, I'm really looking for something that's going to make sense, where if there's racism in the world, if there's poverty, if there's injustices in the world, I can be angry about them on an intellectual level, but how do I deal with them on an emotional level? How do I find healing with all the things that are wrong with our country? And in my various searching, I was searching in Christianity, I became a Buddhist for 5 years, and I eventually came to this point where I thought, hey, there is this thing that I grew up with. How about I unpack it and see how it makes sense with the world that we're in today? And so we're not experts, we're not people who have twasad or anything like that. We are just regular people who are essentially unpacking things that have been part of our lives. And that's the thing about African spirituality. It's all around us, it's everywhere. You don't have to look very far. But a lot of us have been frightened. We've been told, you know, it's been demonized in our national, just general discourse in the world. And so for me, it's my own personal journey has led me to come back to saying, how do I find my own personal healing? And a critical reading of Ubuntu, which led me to Isintu, which led me to Amasiko, then became this territory that has become African spirituality. And I thought, because I'm a journalist, because I come from a background where I'm always sharing information through blogging or writing or whatever, asking questions, this was the natural progression. We both really, really love listening to podcasts, and we thought this is the perfect way in which to hold this conversation. And so we invite artists, politicians, musicians, activists, other people who are also spiritually seeking to ask the questions with us.
Athambile, is your personal experience similar to that? And was there ever a challenge as you journeyed to this point that, it's not cool enough, or other kids were like, oh no, that's old people things? What was your experience in that regard?
Yeah, I think I also had a similar experience of the Christianity and amasiko and kind of being in two worlds. And having to experience what that means, being in two worlds, the cognitive dissonance and the kind of negative impression you get about African spirituality through the lens of Christianity. And so for me, my own challenge is what resonates for myself. So my own personal journey.
Off the platforms of more Western-style mainstream media.
Exactly. And so how do we merge that? And how does it make sense for myself? And how do I share with other people? Because we're all asking questions. And I guess in terms of, is it cool enough? I think it's such a deeply personal experience that for us, it's just about how do I make sense of the world? And maybe the question of is it cool enough speaks to the way in which it's being represented. I mean, people are talking about it in soapies, and it's coming up more and more. But for me, it's not so much is it cool enough, it's what resonates with me and what's going to help me answer the questions that I have for myself, and how can I provide a place for other people who are seeking those questions and maybe aren't at the point where they can ask publicly. And so this is also about, I can listen to the podcast on my own, in my room, in my home, and then find other ways of sharing that information with people. So for us, it's also just giving people permission to lean into the questions that they've had for a very long time. I mean, Millie used the word demystify. I think it's very important, and if we're going to talk about decolonizing in all parts of our lives, I think this is part of this, because one of the things that was snatched and was hijacked is the sense of spirituality, is Ubuntu Betu in our very essence. And so how do we do that again? And
part of the apartheid system also was to strip you of all of your humanity, including your culture and your spirituality and all of that.
Well, it was illegal.
It's also repositioning that has to happen, I believe, in my opinion, amongst Africans, post-colonialism, post-apartheid, and now 20 years into this democracy that I think we're still trying to figure out. What do you think about that?
Definitely. I mean, the beauty of African spirituality for me is that it cuts across everything. It's one of the most hybrid experiences, in a sense, because you can't talk about African spirituality without talking about Islam. You can't talk about African spirituality without talking about all the other influences. So Africa, in its kind of positioning in the world, is almost at the center if we look at a map. But somehow, because of the colonial gaze, is that we jump over that. But everything relies around this. People talk about Africa being the cradle of humankind. So we're the oldest. In a sense, our bodies remember the kind of old heritage that we have, and that the rest of the world has come into contact with us at various points. So for me, while we're kind of using African spirituality as a starting point, I think we're already finding that it's a conduit to talking about ourselves as in relation to the rest of the world, in relation to the East, in relation to the global South, in relation to the global North. And what does that mean for Africa to offer the world at a spiritual level, at a metaphysical level, and bringing that into public discourse in a way that it's not frightening, in a way that it doesn't have the kind of the heebie-jeebies that have been associated with it.
To our day-to-day life. Milisuthando, unfortunately, we do have to wrap. If people want to find this podcast, because I believe you've just started, where can they find it? And who do you believe should be or could be listening to this?
I think that any other person who's seeking spiritually, who's interested in conversations about spirituality in general, can come to the show. We don't really discriminate against anyone. African indigenous knowledge systems are not afraid of other knowledge systems. So it's not like we're not allowing these people, anyone who has interest, but especially those who are hungry for African spirituality, they can come. Our podcast is on Kaya FM, so people can find it from around the world, actually, on kayafm.co.za, and we release new episodes every second Thursday. The episodes are quite long listens, so it's something that you can listen to over a span of 2 weeks.
You can do it over chapters while you're going about your day-to-day or sitting in the terrible Johannesburg traffic, as it were.
Something new.
Ladies, thank you so much. How fascinating. Like I said to you before that, we only have a few minutes, but I believe we could do this for a few hours, and I think we were right. Thank you so much for your time. Their podcast is called Umoya, Umoya, if you're wanting to Google that and find it on the website belonging to the Johannesburg radio station, Kaya.